Before I start, I want to make one thing clear. There are a lot of good books with stagnant characters. I'm saying this because upon revising the script for this video, I noticed a part that leaves me open to criticism. For those of you that watch my Books Literally series, I've reviewed a couple of Redwall novels. Some of the characters there are stagnant, but the books are enjoyable, usually, so even if a few characters, or even the main character stays the same, there's still a lot of good to be had. However, when there is a person who is so mean and selfish to the point that it drags the story down, and they never change, and we're supposed to root for them, that's another thing entirely. With that said, April is D.E.A.R month. You know, drop everything and read. And I know I haven't done a lot of public domain reviews, but they'll come in due time. Right now, I want to utilize this month of literary excellence with an entire 4 weeks dedicated to one of my favorite authors of all time, Nora Roberts. Welcome to D.E.A.R month. On January 1st, 2016, at the stroke of midnight, I turned the final page on a novel simply known as Sacred Sins. This book has been the bane of my existence ever since. A mystery romance, the story revolves around Detective Ben Paris and psychiatrist Tess Court trying to find a serial killer before he strikes again. I'm going to try and look at the positives first, because they do exist. So, let's start with the pros. Number 1. Humor. As always, Nora Roberts has a very sarcastic, dry wit, and she does a decent job of sewing it through the narrative. Secondly, I do like the serial killer in this. He's your stereotypical religious nutball whose mother scared him with Jesus. But I do like how he attempts to make contact with Tess before he starts stalking her. And you end up learning that his sister died of an abortion, and he's so deluded with thoughts of Jesus that he thinks killing all of these women will save her from purgatory. And despite the obvious presence of religion, it never feels forced as you're reading. Next up, we have Ben. Ben is a great lead. He's fun, likable, relatable, and at the start, he has a prejudice against mental health because his brother, who was an Army War veteran, committed suicide after his psychologist assured the family that he was getting better. So, Ben has his own little story arc. Though, as you're about to see, it, along with everything else, is rather stunted due to a glaring issue. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's get to the meat and potatoes. The cons. Number 1. This was published in the 80s, so it's one of Roberts' earlier works. However, it's also one of her most poorly written. Choppy sentences, the reuse of certain phrases and words, and even the flow is incorrect in some places. For example, in the second chapter, Tess is having dinner with her grandfather, and he starts to think to himself. Problem is, the paragraph is so shoddy and disjointed that I had no idea he was thinking to himself until the narration said it. No quotes, no italics, nothing. Now, if you haven't read Nora Roberts before, you might not find this book half bad. But I've read well over 40 of her works, so I feel like I can say that this is probably one of her worst when it comes to sentence structure. Though, she does have a good grasp of the English language, so there is that. And she is immensely talented. Nora Roberts on a bad day is far beyond the reach of many. Number 2. Ben's romantic history. This is a common issue in many Roberts novels. She demonizes men as whores for having multiple past partners. There's nothing wrong with a man having several exes. So long as he didn't cheat on them or beat on them, he's not doing anything wrong. However, in this book, Ben is shamed for not being an innocent little virgin. As a matter of fact, there's one segment where they call him out for, gasp, having 4 partners in his past life. Oh no, what a whore. I personally have faults with the mindset that someone is a whore because they didn't settle with the first person they fucked. I believe everyone should experiment. Very rarely do you hook up with your first love and call it good. And if you think about it, Nora Roberts should know that, considering that she's been divorced once. Finally, let's be professional and talk about the main reason I hate this book. To all writers, I don't have an English degree. I'm not a professional, but being bitchy does not a strong female make. If you want a strong female lead, you have to make her do things. You have to make her lead by example, show by example. I hate Tess. I hate her more than Bella Swan and Anastasia Steele combined and multiplied by infinity. We can't stand spineless women in romance, but what about those ones that are so bullheaded that they border on manipulative and abusive? I'm going to need another list within this list to describe everything I hate about this woman. And I mean it, I hate this character. She makes my blood boil when I think of her. So, let's get started with this list within a list. Listception. She's a bitch. If I'm being blunt. She openly mocks and insults Ben to the point that any other man would have dumped her ass or thought twice before sleeping with her. Whenever Ben tries to protect her or tells her she can't do something for the sake of her own safety, she lashes out at him like a spoiled little brat, going as far in one chapter as to accuse him of sleeping with other female police officers in his unit because he wouldn't let her go near the body of a murder victim. Now, she was hired by the police force to do sort of a character analysis of the killer, to sort of give them a better idea of who they're chasing. So I understand that means she may go near the crime scenes. When a detective tells you to stay away, you do it. They can take pictures and show you later. When Ben asks she stay away from the body, because, she could interfere with evidence, or maybe he just doesn't want her experiencing the same trauma he goes through daily, she throws a tantrum and literally says, and I quote, "You really hate it that I helped, don't you? Because I'm a psychiatrist, or because I'm a woman?" She later goes on to say, again, and I quote, "That strips me of my femininity, maybe even my sexuality. You'd have been happier if you had carried me out of that alley. Never mind the interference or inconvenience. That would have been more comfortable for you." Ben, of course, responds by saying that that's bullshit because he works with plenty of female cops and he feels no need to baby them for being female. And Tess further fucks herself by announcing, "But you don't sleep with them, do you, Ben?" Let me stop here to tell you a fun fact. Persuasion by Jane Austen is one of my favorite romance novels. The protagonist, Anne, was a woman who made a mistake. She let her family convince her to dump her fiancé because he wasn't of decent wealth. 8 years later, he resurfaces, and now that she's an adult and more refined, she learns the errors of her ways. She's a dignified woman who rises above the vanity and gossip of those around her. Persuasion was published in the early 1800s. Sacred Sins was published in 1987. Where did we go wrong in that time? Anne grew as a character and developed. She had a defined arc and became a better person because of the mistakes she made. Tess is the exact same from beginning to end. Even when she starts cooperating with the police, she's still the same whiny, pathetic, insecure woman who calls her boyfriend's masculinity into question because she can't get what she wants. Hang on though, that's not all. She's uncooperative. The serial killer starts calling her office, and obviously Ben wants the wires tapped so they can learn which phone this guy's calling from. And of course, Tess refuses, saying that she has a confidentiality agreement with her patients and doesn't want their privacy invaded. This would be understandable if there wasn't a murderer after you, Tess. He knows where you work. What's to stop him from taking one of your patients when they're leaving your building to go home? There's no logic behind her reasoning. It's just Tess wanting to complain. On top of that, despite the killer blatantly saying that he wants her, she refuses escorts home. She doesn't want officers outside of her house. She constantly fights with the police for no reason. If she really cared, she'd be doing what she could to catch this guy because he poses a threat not just to her and to her clients, but to every woman living in the city where they're at. She only cooperates when the killer murders another lady in desperation because he couldn't get to her, which could have been avoided if she had cooperated to begin with. And, just to add some more salt to the fire, she's a horrible psychiatrist. I will admit, there is a side plot about a young boy named Joey, and I do like that. And I feel like if Tess had been more like she was during that subplot, I probably would have liked her. But for what she is, she's a moron. She thinks this murderer that's killing these women can be rehabilitated. She wants him captured so she can work with him and help him get better. This isn't something you can give pills to. This is a man who thinks that he has to kill women to save his sister's soul. It might just be my own bias, but someone that messed up cannot be rehabilitated. He needs to be locked away. On top of that, whenever she tries to pry into Ben's mind, she doesn't come across as a psychologist. She comes across as that one college student that took half a semester of Psych 101. If anything, it's unethical of her to push Ben into speaking when he isn't ready. Let me tell you another story here. I go to therapy. I have a therapist. And she's told me the story a couple of times about a woman that suffered from severe nightmares. And it took her a couple of years working with this woman before they finally got her to the point that she could confront this thing chasing her in her dreams. My therapist knew she couldn't just start prying. It was a delicate situation and it took time. Tess should know this. She fails at her job if she can't give people space to think. So, kids, what have we learned today? Tess is a bitchy, whiny, incompetent misandrist who gets huffy when her boyfriend tries to keep her safe, refuses to cooperate despite being essential to catching this perpetrator that's killing all of these people, and she's detrimental to her own story due to her unlikable horseshit attitude. Any redeemable qualities in this novel are destroyed by her. She is that bad. Much like Brian Jakes, Nora Roberts is one of my literary inspirations. And as much as I want to give this book a passable score for what it does right, I can't. Tess is the worst character I've ever seen. The worst. Worse than Horty Braybuck. Worse than Bella Swan. Worse than Anastasia Steele. I have never seen a character sabotage their own book in the way she has. At least in Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey, the book as a whole was shit, regardless of who the main characters were. Here, this story could have been good if it wasn't for Tess. She is horrendous. She is everything that is wrong with women in romance. And it makes me mad that this very talented, exceptional author was the one who created her. If there's one word I hate, it's the word potential. It usually has two meanings. One meaning, this could be good, and the other meaning, this could have been good. Sacred Sins had potential. But instead, Sacred Sins is shit. All because of one person. So I'd like to congratulate this book for being a first on this channel. Sacred Sins, regrettably, gets an F.